Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Tom Bennett of Centennial Park. We'll talk about the work of Christina Rossetti and Lindsay Hansen Park on fundamentalist communities. We'll also dive into the Taylor Manifesto. You're all familiar with the Wilford Woodruff Manifesto. Was John Taylor going to give one of those? We'll find out more about those details. We'll also talk about the formation of fundamentalism and the many splits that happened with AUB, FLDS, Centennial Park, and others. So we'll also talk about how the Centennial Park views the LDS Church. Is it the one true church on the earth? You don't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. You're the second, well, technically third person. I met a husband and wife when I was hanging out with Christina Rossetti. We drove to Centennial Park and kind of were like...
So you've been there?
I've been there one time, and somebody in a minivan pulled up, and they were members of Centennial Park that Christina knew, but I didn't know, and I couldn't even tell you their name. And I was like, oh, I should talk to them. So I was so happy when you reached out.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad to do it. And actually, like when we first were discussing possibly doing this, so I reached out to my friend, I consider him personally like my direct priesthood head.
Okay.
He's the guy I can send him a text message and he'll get back to me, and and he's open to all my questions. He's the man who confirmed me a member and ordained me to the priesthood.
And we're hoping to have a future interview with him.
Yeah, actually, it's a different priesthood
it's a different
council
guy.
member.
Oh, okay.
So the man that I've introduced you to, the reason what I'm saying is I reached out to the man on the priesthood council who's been my kind of guide and mentor, and I said, I've got this opportunity to go and represent our work. Are you okay with that? Is that okay with the council? And he was like, you can go and say whatever you feel to say. I said, however, I have noticed that this other priesthood brother has appeared on a podcast before, because I saw it when I was researching Centennial Park.
Okay. And was that on David Sanders' podcast?
No, this was on Year of Polygamy.
Oh, Lindsay.
Mm-hmm. Which
Okay.
I've also appeared on.
Lindsay Hansen Park.
And on her...
Oh, you've been on hers?
I've been on hers
I
years
didn't know
ago.
that.
And if anybody wants to hear more about the spiritual experiences that I had at 15, you can go there and hear it, because I outright just said everything.
Okay. And so this is when you were still in your rowdy stage.
Yep. So I still gave talks at Sunstone. So I gave a talk on the origins of Lucifer, like outside of Christianity, where the Lucifer story has roots in ancient Rome. I gave a talk called Polygamy Beyond Mormonism, where I basically talked about the animal kingdoms and how if nature is guided by divine decree, then, and polygyny is thick in nature, then is it not a law of God? Even beyond what the scriptures say, like, is it not a natural law of God? So I gave a talk on that and a few others that I can't recall. Some of them were pretty funny, but yeah, they've always let me talk at Sunstone, and I've met a lot of great people. I remember one of the highlights of my life is I got to speak right before D. Michael Quinn.
Oh, wow.
And after my talk, I sat down at a table with D. Michael Quinn and Ann Wild.
Oh, wow.
And I remember I got to shake D. Michael Quinn's hand, and I started one of his books one time, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, and it's so comprehensive.
Yeah.
I never have finished it, though I will one day. And I got to meet him, which was a great honor. And I remember Ann Wild turned to me and she said, "You're quite the articulate young man." And I was like, wow, that's like, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Like, whoa, I can't believe Ann Wild just complimented my speaking abilities. She's a gospel giant. You know?
She's been on Gospel Tangents twice.
I've watched. I actually sent a message. I don't know how to reach her personally, but I noticed that last time I went to Sunstone, I didn't see her. And I was like, where's Ann Wild? Has anybody talked to her? Is she okay? Like,
yeah, she's getting close to 90, I think.
We should look into if she's all right, So, but I have a lot of respect for her.
Is she all right? Do we know?
I don't know.
Oh.
I emailed her and I never heard anything back, but I've never been in close contact with her. So,
okay.
But of course, coming to fundamentalism, you're going to read Jesus Was Married, and you're going to read all that Ogden Kraut stuff that you can get your hands on. And
which is her husband.
And also you mentioned Christina Rossetti.
Right.
One of the first works that I read as I began to prepare to be baptized and become a part of the work was her new book on Joseph Musser, which was phenomenal. This is my collection of fundamentalist studies, and I'm 142 pages of notes.
Is this like a diary, basically?
Yeah, just my own personal research. And, I dove into, did the church really continue polygamy? And I went through and, of course, I read about Matthias Cowley and John W. Taylor, and I read about the Woolies and all the claims, and how long did the church secretly practice plural marriage? And, and of course, and then I had to go through, there's all these groups from whence the priesthood council is fractured over the years. Is there one that's correct? And I had to go through all that and study, and it's been a great study.
Yeah. We miss Christina. If you're watching, Christina, keep sticking with Mormon studies.
Yeah, her work is phenomenal. Yeah. And that book, it was just pure meat. There was no fill. It was a short book.
Are you talking about the Musser book?
The Musser book. And I took so many notes. I probably have half the book written in here. And I think there were some quotes that she gave where I wrote like Dr. Christina Rossetti, in quotations, how is she not a Mormon prophetess? Some of the things she said with such authority that I'm like, do you have a testimony of this? Sounds like you do.
I would say no.
I know she doesn't. But it's like some of it, her and both Lindsay Hansen Park have said things I'm like, you sure said that with the clarity and the power of the Spirit and with conviction. So you say you don't have a testimony, but I think I just heard one.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
That's how it sounds.
I think she would disagree with you heartily in my conversations with her.
Lindsay
she's very Catholic.
So Christina I've never met. Lindsay, it's been a lot of years, but we've had some really fun conversations. We've sat in Warren Jeff's office while I drank a beer and she ate a slice of pizza and just hashed out weird Mormon ideas. Well,
and Lindsay was just on Radio West a week or two ago, it seems like. And I don't know how much you know. I haven't followed it very closely, but there was a person who claimed to be the new FLDS prophet.
Oh, Samuel Bateman.
That's who it is. I couldn't remember the name.
Yeah.
And
just got convicted, I think, 50 years.
Right, for rape, basically.
Yeah. Yes.
And I wasn't super clear in listening to that. And I know you're not FLDS, you're Centennial Park, or as you say, you refer yourself as the work more than Centennial Park?
Using the term Centennial Park is just fine. Centennial Park is a community where the work of Jesus Christ is put into action. And Centennial exists to become a Zion. That's what the work is to have those fullness principles that Joseph Smith revealed, a place where they can be put into practice to where they can be a millennial kingdom on the earth.
Okay.
That's what Centennial Park is, to the best that I can put it. Yeah. I'm sure that when you interview the member of the priesthood council, he can articulate things in a much finer way than I can.
Okay.
But that is the gist of what Centennial is.
Well, and I'm curious because I want to get to the FLDS Centennial Park split, but also, when we talked before we turned the camera on, you looked at the Peterson Group or Christ Church.
Yes, they're wonderful. Wonderful.
Apparently you had an experience with the Kingston Group on your mission, and AUB, you've studied them all.
But all the ones I'm aware of, I have, yes.
Yeah. But what did it come down to this one experience with Centennial Park? That's what converted you as opposed to just studying all the others? I'm just wondering why you picked Centennial Park and not some of the others.
The way this happened was when I initially studied the fundamentalist groups and their claims of authority, continuing on the patriarchal work, the Abrahamic work, I was convinced that the LDS Church fully ended the practice of plural marriage due to political pressure. I believe that 100%. I actually believe that, Charles W. Penrose wrote the manifesto and brought it to Wilford Woodruff, and he signed it. That's what I found in my research.
Oh, and did you bring it to John Taylor before that? Because
yes.
In our last interview with Josh Thompson, he said that somebody brought a manifesto to Taylor and tried to get Taylor to sign it. And I said, who was it? Was it Charles Penrose?
My right hand be cut off and my tongue tore from its roots and sign that document.
Was it Penrose that gave that to him?
I don't know. But this had been building for a long time.
Yeah,
the church.
There's a lot of pressure.
I know that you know, and probably most of your viewers know, that the temporal salvation of the church was at great jeopardy. Mm-hmm. They were going to put all the brethren in prison. They were going to seize the properties. I get it. Mm-hmm. But I also do believe firmly that John Taylor did have that revelation in
1886.
I meant to bring you a copy.
I have one.
You have one? Okay.
Yeah. The Peterson group gave me one.
Good. I think that's where I got mine from.
I'll have to post the link because I said, can people download this? And Benjamin Schaefer said, oh, absolutely. So I'll post that.
Yeah. So I believe all those 1886 claims. Now, personal opinion here. I also believe that the Lord put into place other avenues. You know, when brethren were sent to Mexico and Canada, John W. Taylor and those men, they kept work going inside the church until the church finally found out and cut them all off. So my personal opinion, the work was going to continue one way or another. Now, how did I end up in Centennial Park? I believe that there is sufficient evidence to show that initial council of friends
in 1921 or 1933,
I believe it was around that time with the Woolies and the other men, and there was even a lady that, and I've got her name written in the notes, but I don't have it memorized. The lady that was there as part of that experience, those people were given that authority, and we can see a direct transmission of that priesthood authority. You know, and then it came through. I've got a really, really cool picture I can show you.
Text it to me and I'll put it in the video.
Okay. Of that line of authority through to the present day in Centennial Park.
Oh, okay.
And the fruits of the Spirit and the results of the priesthood split that took place that created the FLDS.
Yeah, let's go through that timeline just in case people haven't watched all my 150 polygamy videos. Although I only have 36 fundamentalist videos. So 1886, there's a revelation John Taylor has.
Yes. And the LDS Church accepts it's in his handwriting, but it was never brought to the Quorum of the 12 and ratified by the church.
Right. So the LDS Church doesn't recognize it as legit, but I think most people say John Taylor did write that.
Yeah.
1890, we have the Manifesto. 1904, we have the Second Manifesto. 1933.
Meanwhile, you still have apostles continuing the fullness of the gospel or the patriarchal work, the work of Abraham, polygamy. And
1933, Heber J. Grant says, we mean business. I mean, we should go back to 1906 because 1904 were the Reed-Smoot hearings. Joseph F. Smith was called before Congress. We hear you're still practicing polygamy, so he issues the Second Manifesto and says, "Okay, we mean more business than we meant before." Yeah. And that's when Matthias Cowley and John W. Taylor was excommunicated. Cowley was dropped from the quorum.
Yes.
And
later
disfellowshipped.
But later reinstated to full church membership.
But not the
quorum. Correct. Right. While John W. Taylor ended up dying young of it was stomach cancer or something like that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But John W. Taylor turned in that 1886 revelation at his excommunication hearing with the 12. That's where the LDS...
Is that how the LDS Church got it?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
And so
that was his evidence of Why are you cutting me off? Look what
my
father
dad
said
did
while he was prophet of the church.
Right. Okay, so we have this. What do scholars call that? It's like testamental period or something like that. But anyway, between 1886 and 1933, there's still kind of a gray area. The church is kind of like, let's get rid of polygamy more and more. And 33 is when Heber lays down the law, and it's like, we're done with polygamy.
Yeah.
Anybody who takes it, there were still people who had wives that were quote unquote legitimate.
Heber G. Grant himself had living plural wives after his demise that were sitting in LDS congregations until the 1950s.
Yeah. So they would allow people who had been authorized. Really between...
They wanted you to break up the families, but some did not.
Between 1904 and 1933, there was kind of this little gray area, kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy.
And during that time, you got the
don't
Baldwin
take any more
Radio
new
Factory and the roots of the early fundamentalist movement.
That's when that really starts taking off. And so then... This is kind of the disputed historical area, but John Taylor supposedly set up a priesthood group to continue polygamy outside of the LDS Church, if necessary, and that's where fundamentalism gets its roots. Yes. So it was really kind of one group,
except for the LeBarons.
Oh, the LeBarons are different.
The Benjamin F. Johnson line, and they were in Mexico.
Okay,
that's the only group that I'm aware of that doesn't tie their authority claims to the priesthood council.
Okay.
All the other groups existent today that I'm aware of, AUB, FLDS, Centennial,
Kingston,
and Kingston broke off early from the priesthood council.
Okay.
I don't recall all the reasons why, but...
Okay. Peterson group would be another one.
Yeah.
So all of them except for the LeBarons were one group.
Yes.
And then in 51, there was a split in the priesthood council where Rulon Allred kind of took his followers. Was it Leroy Johnson?
Joseph Musser called Allred, and the other people in the council had problem with it.
Okay. So what became the FLDS?
The group that became the FLDS...
Who was their original leader with the Rulon Allred time?
John Y. Barlow.
Okay.
And then it went on to Charles Zitting.
Okay.
And then it went on to Broadbent for a short season. And then it went on to Musser, of course. And then it went on to I think after Broadbent, it went all the way up to Uncle Roy. I think he was the next one.
Wasn't Leroy Johnson, when the split happened, it was kind of Leroy Johnson versus Rulon Allred. Is that right?
Yes, to create the split
in the 51
between the AUB,
or 50-51 split.
Yes, between the AUB and the group that became the FLDS.
Right.
And then, so at Centennial... We'll read through these priesthood discourses from the 1960s up until late 70s.
So Centennial would have been part of the Leroy Johnson group.
Yes.
Until 1986, right?
Roughly. So what happened there is, so people in Centennial followed the lead of Uncle Roy, Leroy Johnson, and still accept him as a rightful president of the priesthood to this day. But later in his presidency, I wasn't there for this, but I do know what happened.
You've only been a member 6 months,
Well,
right?
I know what happened, but the gentleman you'll have on lived through it.
Oh, okay.
And can tell you in greater detail. I know because I've listened to him.
Right.
And he gets up and teaches us the history in our meetings. There was a great debate brewing for many years over should it be a council or should it be one-man rule?
Right.
And there was a contingency of Barlow men that were gaining influence and power in Short Creek. And as Uncle Roy Johnson declined in health, From what I understand, these men had great influence over him, and two of the other brethren in the community that were strong leaders on the priesthood council were J.M. Hammond and Alma A. Timpson. And in the early 80s, I don't have the date, but I do have it written down. In the early 80s, Leroy Johnson had excused himself from meetings due to his health for a long time. When he came back, he got up and he said, I've given you, brethren, 10 years or more to get in line with me on this principle, and you haven't done it, so I'm throwing you off your backs, throwing you off my back. And he removed Alma A. Timpson and J.M. Hammond from the priesthood council. These brethren were spiritual leaders. They were on the council, and they went on to continue in support of the principle of there being a council and
versus one-man rule.
So
Leroy Johnson, was he a one-man rule guy?
Yeah, he eventually became one.
Okay.
Yes. So in Centennial, we believe that the authority left with these gentlemen, these priesthood brethren, J.M. Hammond and Alma A. Timpson.
Okay.
And they...
Because they were quote-unquote apostates from the FLDS point of view.
From the FLDS point of view and from the Centennial view, they had apostatized from them.
Right.
So, and these men took that authority and began to build up the community. And then after...
Still in Short Creek, or did they move?
Just a few miles down the road.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, Centennial Park. And built, as you've seen it, a phenomenal place with award-winning schools, and just it's lovely. It's beautiful.
Okay.
And what initially started this conversation was somebody had made a comment of a group that people are called up by the Spirit to speak. And I said, that's what happens in Centennial Park. And he said, oh, are you a member of that? And I said, I am now. He said, well, let's talk. And that's the way we conduct things in our meetings in Centennial. It's one of the most beautiful things. I've been called up to speak. It's phenomenal.
When you say called up, like they called you up, or you just felt called from the Spirit to speak?
No. So the meetings are conducted by the priesthood council.
Okay.
There'll be one brethren that conducts the meeting, and that varies depending on however they go about that. I'm sure through a process led by the Spirit, and that brother from the priesthood council will get up, and a prayer will be given, and there will be a hymn, and he'll say, like in the case where I got up to speak, I was sitting up there next to another man who's a relatively recent convert, who's befriended me and welcomed me. They all have in a beautiful, beautiful way. When I went in to first talk to the president of the priesthood about joining the work, I had a kind of a long beard, longer hair. And then this day, I had cut it all off and cut my hair short. And he was looking at me. He goes, who are you? And I said, I'm Tom Bennett. I was baptized a few months ago. He goes, oh, you look different.
So you were kind of a ZZ Top look, right?
Oh, yeah. No, it wasn't that long. And this priesthood brother said, well, come up and speak to us.
Oh.
And I went up there and I told a condensed version of this.
Uh-huh.
And and that's how it works. And people will get called up by the Spirit through the brethren to speak. And they will get up there and they will deliver some of the...
So this is before you were a member?
No, I was a member at this point.
Oh, you were a member at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been called up to speak if I weren't a member. Okay. I'd already been baptized and confirmed. And people get called up to speak, and it's phenomenal to see. The finest, purest of doctrine. And women speak too. A lot of people will ask that. Women are called to speak pretty frequently as well, and will get up there and deliver fine, fine sermons, all as they feel called to speak by the Spirit. And members of the priesthood council will often speak. And this brother who will be coming to speak to you will get up and open the history books and teach us the history of the priesthood council and make sure that the younger generation knows that history.
Of course, I have a couple of Pentecostal friends, and
I've been to Pentecostal churches too.
I'm sure you sound like a Ulysses or something going on an Odyssey. Mm-hmm. But is there any speaking in tongues that happens in Centennial Park?
I haven't seen that. I would imagine that the gift of tongues is understood in the context that most of the LDS understand it.
Oh, okay.
That when another language needs to be spoken,
like Japanese or Chinese,
right?
Or
and if there's not a translator, then there's no use.
okay, so you're different than the Pentecostal glossolalia.
I've never seen it personally happen in Centennial Park, but I haven't seen it. I don't know. It could happen, I would assume.
Okay,
but I would imagine it would be an actual language, if Adamic, if nothing else, right? And would have someone on hand to translate it by the Spirit also, would be what I would imagine.
Hopefully this won't get me in trouble with my friend Matthew, but so I have an LDS. Well, he was LDS. He's not anymore. But he went to a Bickertonite service. Are you familiar with the Bickertonites?
Only slightly.
Okay, so quick history lesson here. Sidney Rigdon, Brigham Young excommunicated each other. Sidney went back to Pittsburgh, started a new church. There's several different names. The one that I remember, but it's not the Bickertonite Church, it's the Church of Jesus Christ of the Children of Zion. Okay. But at any rate, Sidney starts a church. It kind of falls apart. William Bickerton, who Sidney baptized, kind of picks up the pieces and becomes the new leader, joins or puts the pieces back together, and it's to this day it's called the Church of Jesus Christ. Anyway, one of their big beliefs is speaking in tongues. And so my friend Matthew attended a Bickertonite church. Somebody got up, and I'm not trying to be flippant or anything, but spoke in tongues, probably sounded like gibberish, I guess. I don't know, I've never heard it. But Matthew stood up and he says, I know the translation.
Oh.
And he's, at the time, LDS. And he translated what this person said.
So it's supposed to work.
And yeah, and so it's more of a Pentecostal type.
Yes.
Speaking in tongues.
Laying on of hands is a big thing.
Oh, a huge. They do not have a meeting where they, at least that I've been to, where they don't say, would anybody like a blessing? And then they bless them in front of the congregation. Very, very similar to LDS style, laying on the hands. Even I always attended the baptisms, worship services. It happens every time. So, and you don't have to be a member of their church. They'll bless you. And so anyway, I was curious about that. I know because I had a conversation with Josh Thompson, and a lot of LDS people give the LDS definition. Well, it's speaking Chinese or Russian or whatever. As you're a missionary,
which is what it was in the Book of Acts. They were speaking the language of those hearing.
In some cases, but my understanding is they were just, and I don't mean this demeaning, but I don't have a better word than gibberish.
Sure.
And just speaking a weird language. I guess LDS would call it Adamic language.
Right.
But then, Matthew translated. Matthew went on to become Episcopal, member of the Episcopal Church. So It was weird. He didn't even join with the Bickertonites.
So one thing I heard recently at Centennial is there's a strong acknowledgement of the work of the Lord is taking place, and it's happening amongst all people all around the world. I've never heard anybody at Centennial Park speak ill of any other branch of Mormonism or of any other religion, period. Matter of fact, just the opposite. There's an open acknowledgement that the Lord is working through all kinds of people in all kinds of degrees. The Spirit can fall on whoever the Lord wants it to fall on. Now, that gift of the Holy Ghost given by the proper authority, that might be a different topic, but the Spirit will fall on people. Else, how would anyone even have a testimony of Jesus Christ or do good?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the LDS Church specifically, you will often hear in a testimony meeting, I know that this is the one true church.
Sure.
And so I've asked Josh Thompson about the AUB about this, but I'm curious with fundamentalist groups.
What is the view on the LDS?
Well, not only that, but do you view the LDS Church as the one true church, or do you view other groups, Peterson Group, AUB, Kingston, all the others, are they a bunch of apostates? Is Centennial Park the one true church? And, a lot of times I joke that from a fundamentalist point of view, the LDS Church is the JV team and the AUB is the varsity. Are you guys the varsity and we're the JV? I want to understand, how do you view the LDS Church as well as other fundamentalist groups?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we, in Mormonism, we have the understanding that all blessings are given according to obedience to the laws upon which they're predicated, right? So anyone who is following the commandments of God, to whatever degree they are, is going to be blessed in that way. And sometimes I've even found in my personal life, I'll be blessed beyond the degree in which I'm obeying the commandments. Because I've had many years where I didn't care anything for trying to follow any commandments, and yet the Lord blessed me. God is working through all people, and the Spirit falls on people. Now, as far as authority, it is my understanding that it's the position of the work of Jesus Christ that, as Wilford Woodruff said, and other, John Taylor, Brigham Young, that if they conceded on the doctrine of plural marriage, that they would eventually concede on many other things. And I think we share the same opinion that many fundamentalist groups share, that when you change the ordinances, the priesthood does get lost.
Are you talking about temple ordinances? Temple
ordinances, the changing of the garment, those basic arguments that you are well aware of in fundamentalism.
My listeners might not be, though.
Well, there's just certain things that were given by revelation, or ordinances and practices and principles, the nature of God himself. And then when these things are changed, we lose light and knowledge. Me personally, in the conversation with my LDS friend the other day, we talked about, I said, aren't you bothered by these changes? And she said, no, God can reveal what he revealed to his prophets and things change. And I said, yes, usually to the furtherance of light and truth, not to the diminishing of it. We don't take away from the ordinances and the principles that were revealed through revelation. So in Centennial Park, I've heard it said, our purpose is to keep alive the principles which Joseph Smith revealed, because Joseph Smith revealed the dispensation of the fullness of times. And Joseph Smith revealed that there was even further light and truth that were going to come along. I have found things in my studies of the priesthood council back to the days of the Woolies and the Mussers that are further light and truth, where they'll say, when Joseph said this, let me expound upon that. Some beautiful, beautiful quotations. There's one from Joseph Musser that said something to the effect of, it's the desire of our heart, speaking to the fundamentalists, that each of you will get the Spirit of God so much that it will dictate your lives, and that you will become prophets and prophetesses, priests and kings unto Most High God while you are yet living. We're striving to be a community of this caliber. That's the work of the fundamentalists, is to keep those principles alive and to further prepare Zion in a physical gathering place upon the earth for the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. That's what we're trying to do. And there's new light and truth being revealed all the time. That's why I'm in Centennial Park, because I've seen evidence given in the most subtle of ways, where you just sit back and you go, wow, I can't believe that was just said, because that was said by somebody who there's no way he could have known that was said. You know what I mean? These strange coincidences and outright testimonies of such profound magnitude that when you hear them, if they are true, which I have a testimony they are, the gates of heaven are still open, and people are having visions, and the Spirit is leading people, men, women, and children, to do remarkable things. That's my experience.
Okay.
And my testimony.
So the LDS Church has lost some of these revelatory gifts. Is that what you're saying?
And authorities.
And authorities. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, is that a good analogy, the JV and the varsity?
Sure. I think it's fair. I have heard brethren in the priesthood council say, we're thankful for the LDS Church, even as it is today, because it is sharing with the world these basic principles of the gospel, these initiatory concepts that we need to know. And if you continue searching on these paths, we are here for you. And people are finding themselves drawn, to the work. And it seems like every time the church steps further away, more and more people go, wait a minute, I can't accept this. The garment's a tank top now? Wait, what? And they come to fundamentalism because they're trying to find that further light and truth. And it's there. Now, I personally feel, I communicate with people from lots of different fundamentalist groups. I love learning from all people. Mm-hmm. I don't care if Joseph Smith said that is one of the defining principles of Mormonism, to receive truth from whence it may come. And I feel like that's a very important thing to do. I'm not so great that God can't teach me through a rock, We should always be learning the things of the
Moses
Spirit.
struck a rock and learned something.
Sure.
Got some water too.
Right. We should be open to these things. So, yeah, authority is a big deal, and we should look for the authority and try to align ourselves with the priesthood people. One thing on the note of priesthood.
So do other groups have authority? That's what I'm curious about.
I don't believe that they have the fullness of the priesthood authority to...
So Centennial Park has the fullness of the priesthood. FLDS is a JV team?
It looks to me that the FLDS followed on a very perilous path, which literally led to their destruction. I mean, I live in southern Utah. You'll still see some people, but I've met hundreds and hundreds who have left, and they speak back to those days when it was the work of Jesus Christ, and it had...
The days before Warren.
The days before Warren, yeah. And the days sometimes even before Rulin. Everybody loved Leroy Johnson, from what I can gather, and I've heard his sermons. They're powerful and true.
Mm-hmm. So you would recognize Leroy as a leader. I mean, technically that was before the split.
He was the president of the priesthood.
He was the president of the priesthood, so Centennial Park would still recognize Leroy.
Absolutely.
But not Rulin and Warren, and no. I don't know anybody of it. I don't know that fundamentalist.
There are still sermons in the books from Rulin.
Rulin Jeffs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because he was there. He was there in the 70s giving sermons. But that priesthood presidency, that authority, went from President Johnson to J.M. Hammond, Alma A. Timpson, and has continued on to this present day. Now, one thing I would like to say...
So, if I remember right, Leroy kicked Timpson and Zitting out? Hammond. Mm-hmm. Wasn't there a Zitting too?
Charles Zitting was before those days.
Oh, okay.
But there are a lot of Zittings in Centennial Park.
Okay, so Hammond, say them again.
J.M. Hammond and Alma A. Timpson.
So those two broke off or were kicked out, or whatever terms you want to use, out of the priesthood council and essentially started Centennial Park.
Called new men to the council and founded Centennial Park.
And there's 7 on the council?
Yes. And
are they referred to as apostles and prophets?
They're referred to as presidents more commonly, but just informally, brother so-and-so, brother so-and-so. But they are understood to be apostles.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Tom Bennett of Centennial Park. His wife isn't a member of that group. How is she going to react to polygamy? You said she wasn't super religious. Mm-hmm. Is she on board with this?
It's a very good question. She has committed to go with me wherever I go.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.